Did you love reading Dune? Did you watch the movie, read the book, and then wonder if you should continue? I will try to answer those questions and more after the title page. Hello, I'm Pete. This is the Ponderings of Pete. I talk about sci-fi. I talk about fantasy. Sometimes I talk about non-fiction books, but all of the above is typically books. So, Dune just came out, a visually stunning movie. And you've read Dune, the first book, but you're wondering if you should continue on Dune Messiah? Let's talk about that. I think first and foremost, if you didn't like Dune, there may be some specific reasons you didn't like Dune that might want you to continue with Dune Messiah, but I think it's highly likely that if you didn't like Dune, you probably won't like Dune Messiah either. So I think that's probably the first thing to get out of the way. But you might want to continue watching just to see if there's anything that really intrigues you. One of the things about Dune Messiah that is probably better than Dune is that it is a lot tighter of a story than Dune is. It'll take you a lot less time to read, but it still has, I feel like it even has more emotional impact than Dune does. So if the length of Dune and the pacing of Dune was a concern with when you read it, I don't think that Dune Messiah has those. The second reason I would say you probably should read it is because there's likely going to be a trilogy of Dune movies. Right now, I believe Villeneuve's plan is to do film part 2 and then try to get approval for a part 3 that will adapt Dune Messiah to complete the trilogy, which would be great. I haven't heard any rumors about them going past Dune Messiah. I think they could, but I definitely think they probably would stop with God Emperor. Just because it gets wacky once you go into the Frank Herbert and Kevin Anderson stuff. And if you were to adapt the other two, Chapter House and Heretics, you'd have to start adapting Anderson stuff since the last one, from what I know, ends on a cliffhanger. Let's get back to what I was actually talking about. So there's kind of two schools of thought that I've heard about Dune Messiah. One is that Dune Messiah is a great completion for the kind of arcs, etc. for Dune in and of itself. It starts to talk about the themes of Dune more directly than Dune does. And then the second one is Dune Messiah is a really good bridge book from Dune into Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, where things really get wild. Currently, I am on Children of Dune, and it does act as a bridge book, but I don't think that's a major draw, honestly, for it. I think Dune Messiah on its own is actually a really good book, and you should read it just because of that, not just because you want to get to Children and God Emperor, even though Children of Dune currently is sitting at my favorite of the three that I've read. I think Dune Messiah should be valued as its own. So, continuation of themes. What does it do with the themes and the story of Dune? Well, from what my knowledge, Frank Herbert had very specific things in mind when he wrote Dune. And because of the reaction that I've seen among people, I don't think he did the best job in communicating those things. Namely, the dangers of a charismatic leader. I've seen people praise Paul to the utmost extent after only reading Dune. And I think if you're looking to write a book about the dangers of a charismatic leader and people are praising that leader, that tends to be very... I don't know, I feel like that countermands your point to a certain extent. That, and then there's the whole debate whether or not it's a white savior book, which I personally do not think it is. There are several arguments that I think sufficiently explain why it's not, but I'm not really going to go into those right now. But if we talk about Dune in the sense of the dangers of it, charismatic leader, and the anti-imperialism that is displayed within the whole entire series, I think Messiah does a lot better of putting that out there as high, this is actually a negative thing, than it does in Dune in and of itself, because Dune seems very imperialistic. Paul and his mother, Jessica, really take advantage of the Fremen and use the Fremen for things. And I think the biggest thing that is not shown in Dune is the consequences of his actions. They're briefly talked about, the jihad is talked about, and the some semblance of, the Fremen culture is going to change is talked about to a certain extent. But very, very, very briefly in Dune. Dune Messiah really starts to delve into, was this the best idea? It shows you the changing society, and it shows you some of the bad sides of the changing society. And this trend continues. Children of Dune is crazy because I think Children of Dune is kind of so far where it's peaked for me of like, yeah, this was a bad thing that happened. So Dune Messiah definitely gives additional context for Dune that almost helps you get his point more. The joke that I've heard is that Frank Herbert wrote Dune for a certain point to tell people the dangers of a charismatic leader, but nobody got his point, so he had to start writing 6 other books in order to explain it. Which, like, as an author, I'm kind of like, wow, that was so you could have wrote better. I think Dune is still the Dune series is still fantastic so far. As a series, it definitely communicates that, in my opinion. Another thing that I really loved in Dune Messiah that I don't really remember as much in Dune, but I know it was there. I know that this was there, but I think there's some really good scenes in Dune Messiah. And that is the use of the third-person omniscient perspective. So typically with third-person omniscient, you essentially have to do some semblance of third-person limited anyways, because you can't necessarily keep track of 3 to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different people's thoughts when they're having a conversation. They're all in the same room. It's kind of weird. That's just kind of like a weakness of the third-person omniscient, because you have to give everybody's thoughts, but in the end you can't, so you have to end up limiting it to a certain extent. I think that Frank Herbert does a really interesting and beautiful job of using the third-person omniscient in several scenes. There's one specific scene that I'm thinking of that I don't want to spoil you for you guys, but essentially it's 2 people talking in a room, and you essentially seeing them have a verbal, they're talking diplomatically, verbally, but each of them has kind of like a war going on in their own mind. They're like, kind of like, some of it's freaking out, some of it's like, oh, I know exactly who this is, I know what's happening, I know more than you think. And the 2 thought process going in their head is actually like in direct opposition to what they're saying to each other. And it was just a very beautiful scene. I really love the way that he handled that. It was a wonderful way to use the third-person perspective, omniscient perspective, to build tension in a scene, especially when both intentions, both thoughts of the characters are known. So I think there's some really good writing in here that, you just don't want to miss. And kind of going back to the bridge thing, as the Dune series goes on, Frank Herbert gets more and more philosophical. I've definitely heard that God Emperor is super philosophical. Children of Dune was pretty philosophical in my opinion, but I was also really down for it because it was talking about subjects that I was interested in. And then Dune Messiah is kind of similar. It's in between Dune, and Dune Children of Dune in terms of level of, philosophizing that they do. But there's still some really great, people just thinking and you hearing their thoughts and them just coming out and being like, should I? What am I doing? But you get to follow their train of thoughts. And I think, Herbert does a good job of writing this. And I enjoy the subjects that he, inserts into his books. The kind of the commentary that he puts into his books. It's not necessarily commentary on events, but it's commentary on concepts and thought processes and hypotheticals that I really like. So yeah, that's kind of all my reasons for why you should read Dune Messiah. It's a really good book. I think it's a little bit of a step up from Dune, from my perspective, in that it's, especially because it's a tighter story, but with just about the same emotional impact, if not more, than Dune did. So check this book out. Check it out. I'll have links down below. If you like this video, go ahead and like it. And subscribe if you want to see more, please. Yeah, just remember that you're awesome and get some sleep because rest is important. Have a great night.